When you hear the word Viking, what comes to mind? Blood-soaked raids, burning villages, savage warriors screaming into the wind. But what if I told you that image is only half true? Pause, zoom into a map of Europe, arrows appearing across seas and rivers, because while Europe feared Viking swords, they should have feared their spreadsheets. They weren't just raiders. They were dealers, bankers, financiers, and logisticians controlling trade routes from the Arctic Circle to the Middle East. Before Europe even knew what global trade was, the Vikings were already building one. How did the people with no empire, no bureaucracy, no central government, and no paper money create one of the most powerful economic networks in world history? And more importantly, why did it all disappear? How Vikings controlled global trade routes before Europe even knew split images, raiding versus trading. The stereotype of the Viking horned helmet, axe in hand, comes from chroniclers who feared them. Monks, kings, nobles, the only people who wrote history back then. They remembered raids, not receipts. And yet, historians now estimate that for every Viking raid documented, there were hundreds of trading missions never recorded. Fact, approximately 95% of Viking expeditions were trade, not war, based on archaeological consensus. And here's the twist: the raids funded the trade. Raiding got attention, trading got wealth. The combination built an economy that rivaled entire kingdoms. Intrigue line, but how? In a world with no passports, no banks, and no international law, what made Viking trade possible? Map zooming out from Scandinavia. The Viking trade network began by accident, born from geography and necessity. Scandinavia was rich in two things: timber and coastline, but it lacked something crucial: fertile soil. They couldn't grow enough food. They had to import grain, starve, or trade. So they built ships, not clunky sailboats. Technological masterpieces, long narrow hulls, shallow drafts, able to sail the open ocean or glide up rivers. Key point: this unlocked something no empire had before: amphibious logistics. Rome had roads, Persia had caravans. The Vikings had rivers as highways. Arrows on map. Norway gives British Isles, gives France, gives Spain, gives Mediterranean. And then someone realized something life-changing. You can raid a kingdom once, but you can trade with it forever. Between the 8th and 11th centuries, Vikings expanded not to conquer land, but to control access. The trade triangle: Norway gives Novgorod, Russia gives Baghdad in the west. They reached North America. In the east, they reached Baghdad, yes, Baghdad, the heart of the Islamic Golden Age. Beat for reaction at 6,000 kilometers from home, all by river and sea. What they traded: furs from the Arctic, amber from the Baltic, whale oil, iron, and weapons timber. Ships, slaves, tragically, a major export: honey, wax, and dried fish. And we cannot ignore the darkest part. Slaves were a cornerstone of Viking profit. They sold captured Europeans to the Islamic world and Byzantine Empire. Profit does not always equal morality. What they bought: spices from India, silk from China, silver from Arabia, wine from France, glasswork from Venice. The Vikings didn't just buy and sell, they brokered. They became intermediaries. They learned languages. They forged contracts. They acted as global middlemen. They never built an empire on land. They built one on relationships. Picture a spider web across the northern hemisphere. Not owned territory, but controlled routes. These weren't just towns. They were logistics nodes. Think FedEx hubs. But in the year 900, and here's where it gets wild, there is evidence they used standardized weights, customs fees, and even protein insurance. The secret: instability. But all of this depended on one thing: silver. Viking currency wasn't coins. It was metal by Wetterfen hacked into pieces. Show hack silver archaeology photo. And where did the silver come from? The Islamic world. The booming economy of Baghdad. So what happens when the silver stops flowing? In the early 10th century, the Abbasid Caliphate weakened. Trade stalled. Silver production collapsed. Cinematic maps fade to darkness. Trade routes flicker out. Viking markets froze. Prices collapsed. Ports emptied. An economy built on middlemen died when the middle collapsed. Cause and effect. Less silver gives less trade, gives less stability gives more raiding gives more wars with Europe. More wars with Europe gives king's crackdown gives Viking Age ends. The Vikings tried to adapt. They tried settlement. They tried taxation. They tried becoming kings literally, but without international silver, the engine stalled. By 1100, the Viking economy wasn't just shrinking, it was being absorbed. How it ended Scandinavia Christianizes, gives Europe integrates centralized monarchies, replace clan trade. Hanseatic League takes over the Baltic, the Viking network becomes Northern Europe. The Viking trade empire didn't fall, it evolved and disappeared. The Vikings controlled trade routes. Today we call that supply chains. Their economy depended on a single foreign resource, silver. Today, many economies depend on oil or US dollars, or semiconductor chips. When Baghdad collapsed, Viking trade collapsed with it. So what happens if the petrodollar collapses? Or the Taiwan chip industry is disrupted, or the Strait of Hormuz closes? Modern shocking parallels. 90% of global trade travels by sea, 80% of electronics rely on Taiwanese chips, 60% of oil routes pass through political danger zones. The Viking story isn't ancient history, it's a warning. A global network, no matter how advanced, is only as strong as the weakest link. 3 takeaways. Takeaway 1. The Vikings weren't barbarians, they were economic engineers. Takeaway 2. Power doesn't always look like land. Sometimes it looks like access. Takeaway 3. Every global system, no matter how powerful, is vulnerable to the collapse of its foundation. The next time someone says the Vikings were just raiders, tell them the truth. They controlled trade across continents. They connected worlds that didn't even know each other existed. They invented globalism long before the word existed. Nations rise on trade, and fall when the trade stops. The question is, which modern empire is next? If this changed how you see history, hit that like button. Subscribe for more untold stories of how economics shapes empires. And tell me in the comments, which modern trade network is most at risk today? Because history doesn't repeat, but it definitely rhymes.